In 1952, construction workers digging beneath a French cathedral made a discovery that the Vatican tried to suppress for decades. Hidden in a Templar crypt sealed for 700 years, they found a manuscript that shouldn't exist, one that contains step-by-step instructions for opening doorways to other dimensions. The document is called Portae Dimensionum, the Gates of Dimensions, and according to those who've studied it, the instructions actually work. But here's the terrifying part. Everyone who successfully followed these instructions has either disappeared or returned, changed, and the Church has spent 70 years making sure this knowledge stays buried. Today, we're revealing what they don't want you to know. It started with routine renovation work at the Cathedral of Saint-Étienne in Bourges, France. Workers were reinforcing the foundation when their excavation equipment broke through into a hidden chamber 20 feet below the main floor. What they found defied explanation. A perfectly preserved stone room, untouched by time or moisture. The walls were covered in symbols that didn't match any known medieval script. But it was what sat in the center of the room that changed everything. A single manuscript, bound in what appeared to be human skin, resting on a stone pedestal. Despite being sealed away for centuries, the pages were pristine, as if they'd been placed there yesterday. The local bishop, Father Marcel Dubois, was called to examine the find. His first report to the Vatican was brief. "We have found something that should not exist. Send someone immediately." Within 48 hours, 3 Vatican scholars arrived in Bourges. They spent 6 days examining the manuscript before sealing the chamber and declaring the area off-limits. The construction workers were sworn to secrecy, the bishop was transferred to a remote monastery, and the manuscript vanished into the Vatican's secret archives. But not before one person made copies. Dr. Antoine Moreau, a medieval historian working on the cathedral's renovation documentation, had photographed every page before the Vatican's arrival. What he discovered in those photos would consume the rest of his life. The manuscript wasn't just old, it was impossible. Carbon dating suggested the parchment was created around 1307, the same year the Knights Templar were officially disbanded. But the text contained knowledge that medieval scholars couldn't have possessed. Detailed diagrams of atomic structure, mathematical formulas that wouldn't be discovered until the 20th century, and most disturbing of all, precise instructions for manipulating what the manuscript called the fabric between worlds. Moreau spent 3 years translating the text, working in secret from his university office. The deeper he dug, the more convinced he became that the Templars had discovered something extraordinary during their time in the Holy Land, something that might explain their sudden rise to power and their eventual destruction. The manuscript suggested that beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the Templars had found an ancient chamber containing knowledge left by beings from another dimension. Knowledge that allowed them to see through the barriers between worlds and communicate with entities beyond our reality. But this power came with a price. According to the text, opening dimensional doorways required specific conditions, precise timing, and most importantly, a human anchor. Someone willing to serve as a living bridge between dimensions. The manuscript's final pages contained a chilling warning. Those who open the gates must be prepared to guard them, for what lies beyond desires nothing more than to cross over and make our world theirs. In 1959, 7 years after the discovery, Dr. Moreau published a paper titled Dimensional Theory in Medieval Manuscripts. The academic community dismissed it as fantasy, but it caught the attention of someone unexpected. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a quantum physicist working on theoretical research for the US military. Vasquez contacted Moreau privately, requesting copies of the manuscript. She was studying something called quantum tunneling, the idea that particles could move between different states of reality. The mathematical formulas in the Portae Dimensionum matched theories she'd been developing independently. Working together in secret, Moreau and Vasquez attempted to test the manuscript's instructions. They started small, following the text's guidelines for creating what it called minor apertures, tiny rifts in dimensional barriers. The first experiment took place in Vasquez's laboratory in Nevada on March 15, 1961. Following the manuscript's precise instructions, they arranged a circle of specific materials, iron, salt, and what the text called starstone, which they identified as meteorite fragments. At exactly 3:33 a.m., following the manuscript's timing requirements, they began the ritual described in the text. For 17 minutes, nothing happened. Then the temperature in the room dropped 30 degrees in seconds. The meteorite fragments began to glow with a soft blue light, and the air in the center of the circle started to shimmer like heat waves. That's when they heard the voices. Not words exactly, more like whispers in a language that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind. Both researchers reported feeling an overwhelming urge to step into the shimmering area, but the manuscript had warned against this explicitly. The effect lasted exactly 13 minutes before fading. When it was over, they found strange marks burned into the laboratory floor, symbols that matched those found in the Templar crypt. Encouraged by their success, Moreau and Vasquez decided to attempt what the manuscript called a true opening, a doorway large enough for a human to pass through. The ritual required more complex preparations, a larger circle, additional materials, and most critically, someone willing to serve as the human anchor. According to the text, this person would need to maintain physical contact with our dimension while partially entering the other side. They recruited Dr. James Chen, a colleague of Vasquez who specialized in consciousness research. Chen had been studying out-of-body experiences and was fascinated by the possibility of literally stepping into another dimension. The experiment was scheduled for October 31st, 1961, a date the manuscript identified as optimal for dimensional work due to what it called the thinning of barriers. According to Vasquez's notes, the ritual began at midnight. Following the manuscript's instructions, they created a circle 8 feet in diameter using the prescribed materials. Chen positioned himself at the circle's edge, maintaining contact with an iron rod that remained outside the ritual space. At 12:47 a.m., the doorway opened. Vasquez described it as a window into somewhere else entirely. Not darkness, but a space filled with swirling colors and impossible geometries. Through the opening, they could see movement. Shapes that might have been buildings or creatures, but nothing that followed the laws of physics as they understood them. Chen stepped partially through the doorway, keeping one hand on the iron rod as instructed. For several minutes, he provided commentary on what he was seeing. He described cities that extended in all directions simultaneously, beings of pure light that communicated through color changes, and landscapes that shifted and reformed constantly. Then something went wrong. At 1:15 a.m., Chen suddenly screamed and tried to pull back through the doorway, but something was pulling him from the other side. Vasquez and Moreau grabbed him, trying to drag him back into our dimension, but whatever had hold of him was stronger. The last thing Chen said before being pulled through was, "They know about the manuscript. They've been waiting for someone to open the door." The doorway snapped shut immediately after Chen disappeared, leaving no trace except for the burned symbols on the floor. Within days of Chen's disappearance, both Moreau and Vasquez were visited by government agents. Their research was confiscated, their laboratory sealed, and they were forced to sign agreements never to discuss their work. Moreau returned to France, where he lived quietly until his death in 1987. But before he died, he gave copies of the manuscript to 3 trusted colleagues, making them promise to continue the research if anything happened to him. Vasquez disappeared entirely. Official records show she died in a car accident in 1963, but several sources suggest she was recruited by a classified government program studying dimensional phenomena. The Vatican's involvement didn't end with the original discovery. Church records show that between 1952 and 1985, they quietly acquired 17 other manuscripts containing similar information. All were found in Templar sites across Europe. All were immediately classified as dangerous texts, and all were locked away in the Vatican's most secure archives. But the story doesn't end there. In 2019, WikiLeaks released a collection of documents that included references to something called Project Gateway, a classified program studying dimensional manipulation using medieval texts. The documents mention successful experiments creating stable portals and reference encounters with non-terrestrial intelligences through these doorways. Most disturbing of all, they describe efforts to establish communication with entities from other dimensions. One document, dated 2018, contains a chilling observation. The entities on the other side appear to have been attempting to establish contact with our dimension for centuries. The medieval manuscripts may not be human discoveries at all, but instruction manuals provided by these beings to help humans open the barriers from our side. Independent researchers have identified at least 12 locations worldwide where similar experiments may be taking place. These sites all share common characteristics. They're isolated, heavily secured, and located near ancient religious sites with suspected Templar connections. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire story is how it connects to other unexplained phenomena. The timing of Chen's disappearance in 1961 coincides with a dramatic increase in UFO sightings worldwide. The symbols found, burned into laboratory floors, match petroglyphs discovered in caves across 6 continents. And the entities described by those who've glimpsed other dimensions bear striking similarities to beings reported in alien encounter cases. What if the Templars didn't discover ancient knowledge in Jerusalem? What if they were contacted by beings from another dimension who needed human help to cross over into our reality? What if the manuscript isn't a guide for us to explore other worlds, but an instruction manual for them to invade ours? Recent reports suggest that despite official denials, experiments with dimensional doorways continue. Witnesses describe strange lights appearing over government facilities, unexplained disappearances near Templar sites, and most disturbing of all, people returning from these areas who aren't quite themselves anymore. The manuscript warned that opening dimensional gates required a human anchor to keep the doorway stable. But what it didn't mention was what happens to that anchor after repeated exposure to other dimensions. What happens when the boundary between here and there becomes too thin to maintain? Because according to sources close to these modern experiments, some of the researchers aren't just studying other dimensions anymore. They're preparing for something to come through from the other side, something that's been waiting since 1307 for humans to perfect the process of opening permanent doorways. And the terrifying part? Based on recent seismic readings and electromagnetic anomalies detected near known research sites, they may be about to succeed. The Vatican still maintains that the Portae Dimensionum is a work of medieval fiction. Government agencies deny any knowledge of dimensional research programs, but the evidence suggests otherwise. 700 years ago, the Knights Templar found something that changed everything. Something so dangerous that it led to their destruction and the suppression of knowledge that could transform our understanding of reality itself. The question isn't whether other dimensions exist or whether humans can access them. The question is whether we're ready for what's waiting on the other side, and based on what happened to everyone who's tried to find out, the answer might be more terrifying than we can imagine. Because somewhere in the Vatican's deepest archives, locked away from the world, sits a manuscript that could change everything. And somewhere in classified government facilities, people are still following its instructions. The doorways are opening. The question is, who's going to come through first?